Hello everyone, welcome back. So this is a continuation of our discussion in S6 Political Science about the European Union. Before we get into this, before I try to explain this diagram here, let me just take a very quick look at what we saw last time. Remember that in the previous recording, towards the end of that, we mentioned very briefly some of the concerns, long-standing and more recent ones that have occupied and are probably on the minds of the leaders of the European Union. So remember, we talked about, the problem of how to deal with populist nationalism, given that the EU is explicitly, and fundamentally committed to the values and ideals of liberal democracy. And at the same time, given that, there are trends and elements in the European Union that tend towards or prefer, you know, more intergovernmental cooperation or, the creation of supranational bodies or authorities. So how do given these commitments and given these ideals, how do you deal with, a kind of nationalism that appeals to, popular support and, is fueled by stoking popular anxiety, fears about certain issues like immigration. Secondly, like I said, federalist aspirations. You want a more perfect union, a kind of United States of Europe, but at the same time, you will have to deal with problems that come along with um, the expansion of the EU, the greater number of members, and the processes becoming of decision making becoming more complex, probably more cumbersome. How do you make decisions when, there are more members? How do you achieve that federalist aspiration? And lastly, democratic legitimacy. The EU is perceived often as quite remote from the daily lives of Europeans. Most of the business that's done within the EU happen behind closed doors and largely not accessible to the public at large. Perhaps, the expansion of the powers of the European Parliament is one way to address the question of democratic legitimacy. You know, perhaps. Now, let us take a look at this diagram. It's very useful. As you can see, it's from this website, and the diagram itself is was taken from by this website from a website of the European Union. So let me just talk about the different elements in this diagram. Okay, two things to note here right off the bat. One is that the European Union is based on obviously democratic principles. The idea that each citizen possesses political power, which can be expressed through voting. First of all, okay. Secondly, although it's not obvious in the diagram, there's actually uh, the entire organization can actually be understood in terms of the three traditional branches of government. which are the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Okay, and so as I talk about the different bodies and institutions in the European Union in the course of trying to explain this diagram, giving you a broad overview of the EU, um, we're going to discuss these individual institutions in terms of, whether they belong to this or that branch of government. So we can start off with the European Council. So this is part of the executive branch. It consists mainly of elected officials, meaning heads of state or heads of government from each member state. So this body sets the broad policy agenda for the European Union. Okay. So it's obvious that, you know, on the one hand, this is part of the executive branch. On the other hand, you know, the members of the European Council obviously represent the national interests of um, you know their own individual member state. Excuse me. Now, secondly, the European Commission. The European Commission, this has to be made clear, it evidently belongs to the executive branch as well, but this is important to note, it enjoys legislative initiative. What does that mean? Okay, so let us put it this way. As belonging to the executive branch, it oversees the day-to-day workings of EU institutions. So it basically ensures that things are working properly and that the different other bodies and different parts of this machinery are actually compliant to EU policy. But at the same time, like we said, it has legislative initiative. It's the only body that can actually propose laws officially. Okay, so it proposes laws, and its proposals are taken up by the components of the legislative branch. Now, in the process of working out which proposals become law, the European Commission helps in mediating. It actually mediates between the executive and the legislative branches. Okay, I hope that's clear. Next, we have the Council of Ministers or the Council of the European Union. Now, um, technically, this falls under the jurisdiction of the European Council. Okay, this body, the Council of the EU, consists of national ministers. Okay, and so it's quite clear that it's it to a meaningful degree it is part of the executive branch, but at the same time it also works with the European Parliament in the legislative process. So you see, it has co-decision powers along with the European Parliament. So with the EP or the European Parliament, it decides on laws and the budget. And this process is also facilitated by the European Commission. Okay, so just to recap that a little bit, although this falls under that, the Council of the EU is actually part of the legislative branch at the same time. So they, in a real sense, belong together. okay, because they have co-decision making powers with regard to legislation and the approval of the budget. Now, we can speak of the legislative branch, the Court of Justice of the European Union. Uh, it it's like the Supreme Court in the US. It interprets EU law, which has primacy over the domestic laws of member states. It settles disputes between the different bodies, institutions of the EU, and industries, companies, and citizens. Okay. On the other hand, another part of the judicial branch is the European Court of Auditors. It oversees and checks the raising and spending of EU funds. So it has a kind of watchdog and auditing powers. Okay. Lastly, let me just speak briefly about the European Parliament. From the name itself, it's obvious, and we've said it already, and it's no secret. It's part of the legislative branch. It is the only body with members directly elected by EU citizens themselves. It has seen its powers expand in recent years. It has a say in the presidency of the European Commission. And like we said, it works with the Council of Ministers on working out and, you know, um, working towards the passage of laws, of legislation, and the approval of the EU budget. Okay? So I hope that overview gives you a sense of, the different EU institutions and how they interact with one another.